it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink and listen. I once had a demon take my Victorian English class. I sat in the back of my classroom, watching the students give their presentations one by one. It was something I hated more than they did. Well, I hated failing students simply because they were shy and had a hard time speaking in public. But the school mandated that their final be in the form of a verbal presentation of a Victorian author. I took a swig of my coffee and blew my nose into the handkerchief I kept there. I listened as Martin Ash spoke about Emily Dickinson. He was a good student, and his speech was thorough, but I found myself nodding off as I looked down at my notations. Fuck it, you'll get an A. I was too immersed in the fact I'd been up late the night before with my Tinder date. Hey, teachers need to be laid too. Although I know you must be thinking, how inappropriate. No one wants to think of their teachers as someone who has a life outside of the classroom. Well, that would make us human. Martin finished up, and there was an awkward silence as I looked at the list. The following student was one I was not looking forward to at all. I cleared my throat. Excellent, Martin. Next, I believe, is Jolie Greer. I looked up at the front of the class and smiled at my prized pupil. She was brilliant, but there was always something about her that gave me this odd feeling that she was more than just a young girl of 16. Now, Jolie was awkward, which was a heavily laid understatement. She wore long dresses that flowed out like something from another time and space. She wore her hair in an old-fashioned Victorian way, and all of her shirts went up to her chin. She had long, mousy brown hair that frizzed outward in every direction. Her face was pale as that of a portrait. The shape of her mouth was thin like a slit, and her square jawbone seemed too tiny to fit the rest of her. She was lanky and average-looking, yet her eyes sparkled whenever she looked at me. Granted, we all have our favourite teachers, and I guess you could say I was hers. In all honesty, I don't even recall when Jolie appeared in my class. It was as if she was always there. Although I knew that wasn't the case, I just couldn't remember when she'd started my course. But, I didn't like Jolie. If I'm honest, the girl gave me the creeps. I couldn't put my finger on it. There was just something in the way she watched me when I taught. I would pace back and forth, using my hands a lot, and she wouldn't even blink when she looked at me. I tried to remove her from my class and place her in my friend Jennifer's English class, but she didn't want Jolie either. I even tried scheduling my class as the last Victorian class of the day, hoping maybe I'd receive fewer pupils. Well, my hope was that this year I wouldn't get her in my class after hearing the rumours. Now, granted, rumours were rumours. But Mr. Hoffman had to give her a D in his math class, and 2 days after the report cards came out, his house was burned down. They said Jolie was evil, and that she and her wicked mother had cursed him. They said 24 hours earlier they'd found Mr. Hoffman's cat, Linus, stabbed to death on his front porch. So, you see, I had my reservations. I tried not to make it obvious to her that she creeped me out, but I tended to avoid her unless I absolutely had to speak to her. Well, the other students seemed oblivious to her and didn't give her a thought in the world, as if she were no more significant than an ant that you walked on. She was a wallpaper stain, one you couldn't get rid of no matter how much effort you put in. I didn't feel bad for my feelings either. "Shall we begin, Mr. Edwards?" she asked in a high-pitched voice that made my entire body cringe when she spoke. Yes, Jolie, go ahead. The stage is yours," I said, trying to sound jovial. "Very well. Nathaniel Hawthorne was a cursed man for most of his life, still more so than his grandfather, who was said to have been the judge and jury of burning the women of Salem, Massachusetts. She began in that voice that seemed more like an imitation of a girl of 16 rather than a real girl. Well, it figured she'd pick a man whose grandfather had been accused of being a cursed human being. I took a deep breath and tried to listen to her. Well, she spoke well, eloquent even. She provided information that was new and interesting. Clearly she'd done her research. When she finished, she stood there grinning at me. She never blinked, only smiled at me as though she were a picture. Well, thank you. You may sit down, Jolie. She took her seat, and the next student provided us with information about why Mark Twain was really racist. Well, I barely listened. I couldn't even concentrate after Jolie. She was facing the front of the classroom, and her back was towards me, but I couldn't help feeling like she had her eyes in the back of her head, just glaring at me. That afternoon, when school was over, I packed away my things and headed out to my truck. I got inside just in time as it began to thunder and lightning the moment I shut the door to my truck. The rain poured down so heavily I couldn't hear anything except the rain hitting the roof of my vehicle. I turned on the wipers, and they went to town, swishing the water off my windshield in buckets. I pulled out of the parking lot, and then had to stop abruptly right as I went to turn into the street. Standing in front of my car, grinning from ear to ear, was Jolie. She waved to me, and I rolled the window down on my truck. Well, I could pretend I didn't see her and drive away. Unfortunately, she walked directly into my sight, so that I had no choice but to see her. Well, Jolie, it's pouring out. Did you forget to take the bus? Oh no, I always walk. But today I got stuck in the rain, she said, still grinning. She looked at me for a long while as the rain drenched her from head to toe. I took a deep breath and finally opened my mouth. Would you like me to drive you home? I asked, hoping that she would maybe decline and that her mother that I'd heard so much about would come. Oh, jeepers, Mr. Edwards. Yes, I suppose that would be okay with Mother. She hopped into my truck and I took her satchel, putting it on the floor while I tried to move things off the front seat of the truck. We drove for a few moments before she finally spoke. I looked down at her, and Jolie sat there looking straight ahead with that giant grin. It was like she wasn't real, and it was always on her face. I don't think I'd ever witnessed one single emotion besides that Cheshire cat grin. Is your street the one on the left just after Jefferson Avenue? I asked her. Oh, Mother's always going on about how there's no gentlemen left in the world, but I think you just proved her wrong, Mr. Edwards. She looked up at me with the most severe gaze I'd ever seen in her eyes. Well, thank you, but I'm polite. I mean, we are friends after all, I said, not really sure what to say to her. My street's 2 up from here, she said, her face returning to that grin. I then pulled into her driveway to let her out, and I noticed her little brick house had no lights on. Well, it seemed strange because it was so dark outside with the storm. All the other places had their lights on, yet this one remained dark. I thought no more of it as she exited the vehicle. Thank you so much, Mr. Edwards. Your good deeds will not be unnoticed, she said, shutting the door to the truck and running to her door. There was an audible sound of relief that left my mouth as I let out a deep breath. Just being near that young lady made my anxiety go up. I didn't know why. The next day I went into my classroom but stopped as I noticed the lights were already on. When I opened the door, a woman was sitting at one of the desks in front of the classroom. She was dressed like something from 1910, the same style that my student Jolie wore. The woman stood up and walked over to me, carrying a basket. Hello, my name's Evelyn. I'm Jolie's mother, and I wanted to bring this to you to say thank you. I smiled, looking down at the basket with what looked to be red velvet cupcakes. Oh, my favorite. How did you know? Oh, Jolie knows everything about you, Mr. Edwards. You're her favorite teacher. The woman smiled at me. I felt that tinge of awkwardness that I felt with Jolie. Well, the apple didn't fall far from the tree. Oh, thank you very much, Evelyn, but this isn't necessary. Oh, but it is. Please take these as a thank you. I looked down at the delicious cupcakes and decided I couldn't accept them. I wanted to, but I felt like I'd be inviting more of this intrusive behavior if I did. May I ask you how you got in? I always lock the door at the end of the day. Oh, the janitor let me in, she said, holding up the cupcakes again. Look, I'm sorry, but I can't accept gifts from parents. They may think it's bribery. I smiled at her, hoping she'd get the hint. Well, then you must come to dinner tonight at 6 sharp, no earlier, no later. She looked me dead in the eyes. It unnerved me, and I found myself accepting her invite just to get her to leave. You know what? Sure, why not? Excellent. We'll be expecting you. Don't be late, she said, and seemed to disappear in the blink of an eye. When I noticed she was gone, I looked down at my desk to see that she'd left me one of the red velvet cupcakes. I smiled and, peeling the wrapping off, took a large bite and a giant swig of my coffee. No one would see me. However, the rest of the day, I did have trouble concentrating. The mere thought of that woman and the young girl inviting me to dinner seemed even more creepy. There was just something about Jolie and her mother. Well, it wasn't the rumors I'd heard, but rather the way they were. They weren't like other people. It didn't matter how nice they were, they creeped out everyone they met. I felt tired as the final bell rang. Jolie came over to my desk at the end of the day and stood looking at me very seriously. Mr. Edwards, don't forget that dinner is at 6 sharp. Mother hates when guests are late for dinner. Oh, you may want to wash up a bit too, she said, giggling and then running out of the door. I got up and shut the door. I wanted to finish up my grading for the week before I left. I really wanted to stall the dinner date that I'd been put on the spot for. I had to take off my glasses and rub my eyes. I closed them for a brief moment. Well, before I knew it, it was 5:45. I must have dozed off. I stood up and went to my truck. In the back of my mind, I kept thinking about what Jolie had said. Mother doesn't like guests to be late. I arrived at 6 sharp, just as I was told. This time the house was illuminated with candles and dim lighting throughout the place. Jolie greeted me in a pink Victorian-style gown and a cup of tea. I thanked her, and her mother Evelyn came in to take my coat and provide hors d'oeuvres. The food, like the velvet cupcake, was delicious. When it came time for dinner, I was actually excited. I'd lightened up a bit around both of them, and I felt catered to. I tried to forget that earlier I'd been so creeped out. So, Mr. Edwards, tell us about yourself, Evelyn asked, pouring a glass of red wine for me. Well, I grew up in Chicago and moved to Idaho for a bit before settling here in Massachusetts. I took a sip of wine, which tasted amazing, finishing it off in seconds, and suddenly began to feel a bit odd, drunk even. How was the wine? Jolie asked. Oh, great. What brand is it? It's a home recipe passed down from generation to generation. A little secret. Evelyn laughed as she poured me another glass. I began to sip it. Even though I felt funny, the taste of it made my taste buds go wild. If this was what bribery was, Jolie could have an A for every semester from here until the end. Oh, I'm sorry, ladies, but I really must use your restroom, I said. It's the first door on the left after the kitchen, Jolie offered. I stood, but I could barely walk. I made it to the restroom, did my business, and then as I was walking back to the dining room table, I fell. When I opened my eyes, I was in a dark room with no light. I went to rub my eyes and realized I was unable to. Something was keeping me from being able to move. And then I heard laughter. "He's trying to move," said a voice that sounded more resounding than the two women. "Hello?" I yelled. "Mr. Edwards, don't freak out. I'm here, your favorite student. Now I get to thank you by being your teacher." I felt something around my body. 2 hands wrapped around my waist, lifting me off the seat I was in previously. Then 2 more hands grabbed my feet, moving me to a mattress. "What's going on? Untie me now," I yelled, feeling quite frustrated at this point. Then I felt something hit my face. Well, it was a hand, I thought. "He isn't perfect, but he'll get there," said an older woman's voice that I now recognized as Evelyn's. Please, why am I here?" I began to panic. And then a light switched on. I found myself on a bloody mattress, and in the center of the room was something that looked like a shower basin. It had a tube that was going straight into an old wine barrel. "We did bring you here to teach you a lesson. You see, Mr. Edwards, you have many imbalances. Jolie can read your mind, and we both know now that you don't like Jolie. Can you tell us why she creeps you out and, well, in your own words, makes you cringe whenever you're around her?" Evelyn asked, sitting in my face, holding something behind her back. "I always liked having Jolie in my class. She's an above-average student," I said, panicking. "Well, yeah, but you shouldn't let rumors cast shadows on me," said Jolie, still with that damn creepy grin. I don't know what you mean," I said now as I began to really worry about my well-being. "Mr. Edwards, we have to know you mean it." "I do mean it, every word," I said, trying to reason with my captors. "You have to show us that you mean it." I heard something scraping on the bottom of the floor where I was tied up. When I looked behind me, Jolie was holding a large axe. "How much do you mean it?" "Just tell me what the hell you want," I screamed. The 2 women looked at one another, and then they both began to laugh. "Jolie is very talented, Mr. Edwards. I don't think you know how much. Well, darling, please show Mr. Edwards how talented you are." I suddenly felt a sharp pain in the center of my forehead. It felt as though someone had taken a knife and was digging into my brain. I screamed and nearly blacked out when I heard a voice. It wasn't as high-pitched as it usually was. "I always really loved you, Mr. Edwards. Until that day you drove me home in the rain. Well, I could hear your thoughts as I can now. It broke my heart to know what you really thought of me. Tell me, how does it feel to be in such pain? Like the pain you caused me?" I screamed again, and then I felt no more pain. "You shouldn't judge a book by its cover. Mr. Hoffman lied about me because he's a nutcase. And you chose to believe him over me? How dare you?" she exclaimed in a fit of outright anger. Jolie's eyes began to get black as the shadows cast upon the walls, and then her grin got wider and wider until she opened her mouth, revealing sharp teeth. "Please," I cried, now wishing that this would all end. And her face returned to normal. "Fine. Make a sacrifice," Jolie said to me. "Anything you want. If you want straight A's, you got it. A college recommendation, you got that. Oh, please, tell me what you want. I just want to go home." I began to cry after what I'd seen. I knew that these 2 were not human. "Would you do anything?" Yes, please, anything you want," I pleaded. "Cut off your riding hand," Jolie said, smiling again. What? I looked at her, and then Evelyn came over holding the axe. Don't worry, Mr. Edwards. It's easy peasy. Once you show us you will do anything, you're free. Just make sure to let yourself drain out over here. She pointed to the basin. Mr. Hoffman sacrificed his kitty cat for us. Oh, that was way sadder, wasn't it, darling? Jolie nodded. Well, if I wanted to fight back, I couldn't have. They dosed me with something that kept me barely able to move, which made the task of slicing into my own wrist that much more difficult. I felt sick, but I knew if I didn't do it, something worse would happen to me. I took the axe in my right hand, still tied to the bed. I could barely move it as far as I needed, but it was enough to do the deed. I turned on my side to get a good length so I could move, and then I stretched my hand over my body until it was on the mattress. It barely reached. But then I went to cut off my hand and realized that I couldn't. Oh, it'll require a bit of creativity, Evelyn smiled. I closed my eyes then, realizing that I'd have to use the axe blade to cut my hand off slowly, slicing into my skin 1 centimeter after another. I barely had the energy for either option, but I tried as I might. I bit down on the pain as I made my first slice. Blood leaked everywhere, all over the mattress, all over me. Then I made a second cut. More blood over the thick skin. Oh, I wanted to throw up, as I was never much of a blood person. The mere sight caused me to pass out in most cases, but I knew I couldn't pass out, not now. I had to finish this sadistic task. I cut again and again. More flesh. Now it was closer to my bones and tendons. This was going to be the hardest part. Well, thank God the axe was sharp like a knife, so it made cutting into my own skin easier. I couldn't take it anymore as the sound of the flesh cutting and the blood was driving me crazy. It was slow torture, until I finally sawed into enough bone to make one final weak-ass blow to my wrist, cutting the flesh until there was only a tiny thread of skin left attaching itself. I was screaming the entire time. I may even have blacked out. When I did, they walked me over to the basin, forcing me to bleed out. The last thing I heard was my blood flowing into the basin. I noticed that the two women were trying to get as much blood out of me as possible to go into the wine barrel. They didn't even appear human any longer. Their eyes went black, their teeth became sharp, and their tongues slurped at as much of the blood as they could muster. It was as if something demonic had taken over them both. No more was there the sweet Cheshire cat grin, or the polite woman wanting only the best for her child. These were diabolical beasts. Fuck. What was it I drunk? I passed out then. When I woke up, I looked around, shocked to find myself back in my classroom. What the hell kind of nightmare had I just experienced? Had it been something in that cupcake? I stood up like a bat out of hell, looking around for Jolie or Evelyn. And I looked down at my left wrist. It was still attached to my body. The only thing different was a small bandage wrapped around it to remind me that something had indeed happened to me. Jolie and Evelyn were nowhere to be found. There wasn't even a record Jolie had ever attended school or took my Victorian English class. It left me with so many questions, like, who was Jolie Greer? What was she? I gave my 2 weeks' notice after that. I won't say where I work because I'm still a bit frightened. I mean, who wouldn't be? I chalked it up as a lesson to always treat others as you'd want to be treated. I certainly wouldn't make that mistake again. Well, a short, sweet and delightfully bizarre tale for your Sunday evening's entertainment from the ever-wonderful Black Friday's Witch 13. How many stories of hers have I done now? Don't know, lost count, but always an absolute delight. Hope you enjoyed that one as much as I did. Your thoughts, feelings, and anything else you want to say in the comment section below the video, and as always, I will do my best to join in the conversation. Well, back again tomorrow night with a feature-length story. 1.5 hours, 2 hours long. Not sure which one I'm doing yet, but it's going to be a biggie, so make sure you tune in then. Till then, my dear friends, have a lovely Sunday, and sweet dreams. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.